Hi guys, my name is Ariel Nye, and I'm going to talk about mangrove ecosystems and how climate change is affecting them. Mangroves are trees that grow in intertidal zones along the coast in the tropics and the subtropics. They grow between 25 degrees north and 25 degrees south, but can move further north or south based on temperatures in that region. They cannot survive freezing temperatures of any sort, and therefore the largest mangrove habitats occur in water temperatures over 24 degrees Celsius and along the equator in shallow waters. There are about 52 true mangrove species coming from 16 different families. NOAA says that there are as many as 80 species of mangrove. Most mangrove species are not closely related because the term mangrove describes the physical properties of a plant, not its lineage. A mangrove is a plant or tree that has the ability to grow in tidal areas and salty soil, which is not something that many plants can do. This loose description of what a mangrove is can lead to the differing number of species that are considered mangroves. Mangroves are a vital ecosystem for both humans and animals. For humans, they are important economically because they protect the coasts from erosion and protect coasts from storm damage. They are also a food source and good for other services in areas like Southeast Asia, where their estimated worth is over 4,000 US dollars per hectare per year. They provide food, wood for fuel, and building materials. For animals, they are a nursery habitat for many fish species. Many bird species are found here, and there are some species that are only found in mangrove habitats, like the mangrove crab that lives at the roots of mangroves but can be found climbing up in the trees as well. From a distance, they can look like large spiders because they're dark colored, and it's honestly very terrifying if you're not paying attention. Some endangered species that rely on mangrove habitats are the pygmy three-toed sloth, the mangrove hummingbird, the rainbow parrotfish, and Goliath groupers. In the U.S., we have three common types of mangroves: the red, black, and white mangrove, all of which grow along the coast of Florida. Red mangroves are known for their large prop roots, which you can see here, which prop them out of the water, and they're found at the edge of the mangrove ecosystem closest to the water. Black mangroves have propagule roots that pop out of the ground or water, which you kind of see right here. They're found in the middle zone of mangrove ecosystems. White mangroves are the furthest inland and are known for their little white flowers that they produce, as well as the whitish color of their leaves that they get from excreting salt, shown here. The direct effects that mangroves face due to climate change are an increase in temperature, rising sea levels, change in the pH of the ocean, and an increase in storm frequency and severity. As greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere, the climate of the world is changing. In many places, especially along the coast and the tropics and subtropics where mangroves are located, it is causing temperatures to rise. This increase in temperatures is expected to have multiple effects on mangrove ecosystems, such as change in the composition of species, a change in phenology, an increase in mangrove productivity, and the possible expansion of mangrove range into higher latitudes. These high temperatures can cause mangroves to die at high rates, which has already been documented in some areas, like in the southern Gulf of Carpentaria in 2015, where over 7,400 hectares of mangrove habitat was lost due to extreme temperatures. Sea levels have risen 12 to 22 centimeters just in the last century due to thermal expansion and the melting of glaciers and sea ice. By 2100, some believe that sea levels could be as much as 1.4 meters above sea levels from 1990. Mangroves who rely on a fairly constant water level will have to change in order to accommodate these rising levels. They can be pushed further inland, where they will meet resistance from human developments. They also have to deal with the change in the sediment because of the change in water levels, and mangroves are very dependent on soil composition and steady soil levels. The rising CO2 levels are causing oceans to become more acidic because they are a major source for taking in carbon, but this is bad for mangroves because it kills coral reefs, which help protect mangroves from waves. More waves mean more erosion of the land and the soil. The increased severity and frequency of storms is another side effect of climate change that mangroves are facing. Increased storms are bad for mangroves because severe storms can cause mangrove death, less growth in mangroves, and more possible erosion. In some cases, mangrove habitats that are faced with too many severe storms end up being converted into tidal mudflats, which change the biodiversity of the ecosystem as well. Climate change can also cause some indirect changes for mangrove ecosystems, such as loss of habitat, loss of biodiversity, and loss of stability along the coast. One of the biggest problems that can happen from climate change is the loss of habitat for mangroves and all the species that are part of that ecosystem. The increase of temperatures can cause major die-offs of mangrove trees, leading to much less mangrove ecosystem. Another thing that can lead to less mangrove habitat is increasing sea level because mangroves would have to move further inland to be in the water level that they can survive in. But there is only so far inland that species can move before they are encroaching on areas that humans are settled in. Although there is the possibility that mangroves will be able to extend into higher latitudes, I don't think that expansion will be enough to compensate for the loss of already established habitat, because it can take years for a habitat to establish itself, but only a couple of years for the ecosystems to die. I think that in the coming years, mangrove habitat will be lost faster than it can spread, leading to an overall loss in mangrove habitat. The loss in habitat has a direct effect on the biodiversity in mangrove ecosystems. Less habitat and changes in the habitat lead to a loss in biodiversity. Another reason for loss of biodiversity is a change in the phenology due to climate change. As the temperatures get warmer, the timing of flowering and animal migrations will change, which will change the biodiversity in many ecosystems, including mangroves. Another problem that can happen because of climate change is a change in the species demographic. All species have a varying time of recovery and reproduction, so if any species are taken out by storms or drought, they might not immediately bounce back, which can change the species demographics in that ecosystem. Some species might also be better equipped to handle the storms or better equipped to handle desiccation and drought, while other species are more vulnerable to these environmental factors. The loss of stability along the coastline also has to do with loss of habitat for mangroves, but this is something that will greatly affect humans. As climate change worsens, the mangrove habitat is lost. It will make the coastlines weaker and more susceptible to storms. This, coupled with the increasing intensity of storms, can lead to weaker trees, meaning less of a storm buffer along the coast. Some ways that mangroves can be protected are for humans to be greener, to protect mangrove habitat, to restore mangrove habitat, to learn more about mangroves, and to teach people more about the issues. If humans can reduce their CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions, use green energy like solar and wind energy, and put less trash and other waste in the water, this would have a major effect on mangrove ecosystems and could make them healthier. The healthier they are, the more likely they are to be able to survive climate change. Protecting current mangrove habitat is important, no doubt, but I think that protecting possible future mangrove habitat is just as important. Mangroves are going to be shifting their range, just like almost every other species, because of climate change, and we need to make sure that they have a protected area to move into. Another great possibility for saving mangrove ecosystems from the effects of climate change is to help restore the current degraded ones. If we plant more mangroves, then the ecosystems grow and become healthier, again making them more likely to withstand the effects of climate change. This is being done all over the world with great results. Northern Tanzania replanted 107.4 hectares of mangroves over the last 7 years, and in Kenya, local communities planted over 300,000 mangroves. Being able to study and learn about mangrove habitats has given us so much knowledge about how they're being affected by climate change, but there is always so much more to learn. If we continue to study these ecosystems, we can learn how they are trying to adapt and might be able to help them combat the effects of climate change. Finally, we need to be teaching more about mangrove systems. If people don't know about these ecosystems, how can we expect them to want to help them and save them? In order to have the greatest chance of helping mangrove ecosystems to survive climate change, I think that we need to use all 5 of the possible methods that I just mentioned. There's also the human component that is affecting mangrove ecosystems, but I did not really discuss this here in this paper. There's enough going on in that topic to add at least another 4 pages, and it doesn't really involve climate change like that. But when it comes to saving mangroves, human impacts do need to be considered along with climate change, and all the methods for protecting mangroves that I listed can be applied to both human impacts and climate change. On a positive note, there have been multiple studies that show that mangroves could be very beneficial for the increasing CO2 levels. Because they live in tropical and subtropical areas, they are constantly growing and photosynthesizing because they don't have any cold season that they need to hibernate. I don't know that's that word. Although many mangrove ecosystems are limited by the amount of other nutrients in the soil as well as the salinity of the soil, they are able to take in more CO2 and exceed the current growth rates that they're showing right now. This ability to combat climate change makes mangrove ecosystems even more important to the world, which means we need to do what we can to protect them. If the right changes are made, I think that mangrove ecosystems are going to be able to thrive, even though they are likely going to be affected hard by climate change in the near future. Thank you for listening.